I invite you to read our master plan, Envision Goddard, Modernizing for the Future. Learn how Goddard will meet the challenges of the future, exploring our planet and the far reaches of our universe, while inspiring the next generation of explorers and protecting our environment. We are Goddard Space Flight Center.
NASA researchers spend weeks, even months at a time, in remote locations around the world, collecting critical data about Earth's environment. Many studies are done from the air, using NASA's fleet of research aircraft. One such mission is Operation Icebridge, a multi-year study of polar ice conducted by the NASA Airborne Science Program. Icebridge sends NASA's P-3 flying laboratory to Greenland and Alaska in the spring to study changing ice conditions in the Arctic. A second aircraft, the NASA DC-8, flies from Punta Arenas in southern Chile in the fall to measure land and sea ice over Antarctica. It takes months of planning to execute a major international mission like Icebridge. Diplomatic clearances, configuring the aircraft with scientific instruments, and finding facilities that can support the people and the airplane itself are just some of the preparations needed for Icebridge to meet its mission requirements and goals.
To deploy to someplace like Chile, we plan a good 6 months before the mission to bring everything together so that once we arrive here, we're ready to execute missions on a daily basis.
Typically a mission director, a mission manager, program manager, we get called different names, will do the site surveys for the location, liaisoning with the government, of the host government to the host airport. That's the real legwork that's done prior, is coming out and making sure that they can house and feed us and take care of the people in the hotels. You name it. There's a lot of little tiny details that can't be overstated.
The biggest logistical challenge for the project as a whole is to set up all of the lab space and the facilities so that the scientists can process their data and make their decisions about which project.
Logistics is huge for something like this because we have to make sure we can all support the people in the field as well as the aircraft. So we think a lot about aircraft spares and then little details about the support equipment for the airplane.
Usually on every deployment we're going somewhere, there's at least a group that goes out and scopes it out. A lot of it's done like while we're working other missions. And they will talk with the airfield, set up and tell them what we're going to be doing. And then as they're communicating back with us with what capabilities the airfield has to support us, that way we know what to ship.
For a deployment more than 6,000 miles away in the southern hemisphere, the maintenance crew needs to carry an extensive payload to maintain the DC-8 on site and keep the mission on schedule.
Yeah, we put them right on the side there.
More than 13,000 pounds of cargo are packed on the DC-8. Everything from spare tires, parts, and tools to basic comforts of home for the near-daily 11-hour research flights over Antarctica.
On a deployment like this, we bring the equipment with us, and we also ship a lot of other things by sea in a big container so that we can keep the airplane moving. It'll come back from a mission. If there's anything wrong that needs to be repaired before the next flight, we have the maintenance crew to support it during the night and get it ready for a mission the following day.
The DC-8 flight operations team works around the clock to support Operation Icebridge, providing ground support for takeoffs and landings, operating the plane on research flights, and making sure sensitive science instruments stay powered up and heated overnight. The airfield is staffed 24 hours a day.
We have a makeup of about 28 people supporting the flight operations down here, and that consists of the pilots, flight engineers, navigators, mission directors, and then the maintenance crew that's split between mechanics and avionics technicians.
The maintenance team often works on tight deadlines to prepare the aircraft for its next deployment. Just 10 days after removing one set of science instruments from a previous mission, the DC-8 is reconfigured for Icebridge. In 3 weeks' time, the plane is transformed into a working science laboratory with a suite of radar and laser instruments and cameras installed throughout the cabin, cargo pit, and fuselage.
Yeah, the unique thing about the DC-8 is that it was modified to accept, at this point, we've got about 100 different instruments that have been integrated into this airframe. And so part of the modifications that were done early on was to make the airplane as versatile as possible. So if you were to look through the airframe, you'd see cutouts in both the bottom of the aircraft and the upper side of the aircraft. And a number of the windows were modified to carry structural loads of instruments being installed as well. So we can look in pretty much every direction there is outside this airplane as we're traveling through the sky.
Once the science instruments are installed, the flight operations team conducts a series of ground checks and instrument test flights over the California desert to make sure the DC-8 is mission ready.
Looks like maybe it's level now. Right, looks like it's a wings level and rock course.
So the reason why we picked these sites over the desert in California is because they have these dry lake beds there, and they are a very flat area that's ideally suited for our purpose. So we can put a GPS receiver on a car and kind of drive around on these flat lake beds, measure them, and then a few days later fly over the same area with the DC-8 and take a measurement from the air, compare the two measurements and use the data from the ground to calibrate and validate the airborne measurements.
While the aircraft is prepared for the trip to Chile, the science and flight operations teams are required to undergo specialized safety training, regardless of if they've flown on the DC-8 in the past.
Well, for the DC-8, everybody who flies has to go through basically a safety briefing. We go in a little bit more detail because we do more things on our airplanes than commercial airliners do. From our pilots, they go through survival training, water and land, and depending on where they're going, some of them have been through Arctic. All of our crew members, they all have to go to altitude chamber, water survival, land survival, and what we do here is we just build on that and then try and bring anybody else that hasn't had any formal training up to speed so they have at least a working knowledge of the kind of conditions that can happen if something was to go wrong with the aircraft.
Safety equipment tailored for Icebridge is also packed on the DC-8.
Overhead compartments, we've got 20-man life rafts. There's 4 of those on board the aircraft. We have 2 what we call global survival kits, which has different survival items inside of there. For this particular deployment, we also have anti-exposure suits, which if they were going to the water, we have enough for everybody on board the aircraft for that.
Once the aircraft and passengers are cleared to fly, it's time to pack up for the long transit flight from Armstrong Flight Research Center in California to the southern tip of Chile.
Hi, I'm Nikki Fox, and I'm in charge of all sun science here at NASA. This is Ask NASA, and I'm here to answer your questions. Is the sun a ball of fire? No, it's not. We know that the sun can't be a ball of fire because we need oxygen to be able to have combustion, and there's no oxygen in space. The sun, however, is a giant nuclear furnace. The core in the very center is very, very similar to a nuclear reactor, and all of these particles get squashed together, and there's a huge amount of pressure, and they undergo chemical reactions, and so there are very different layers as you move out towards the edge of the sun. Why does NASA send missions to the sun? Because the sun is the most important thing in our solar system. The sun generates light, but also a tremendous amount of energy, and it sends all of this material to us here on Earth. And so we live in the extended atmosphere of the sun. We've looked at the sun in every different wavelength, but recent